Do you want to bust your sales quota? Do you want to join the ranks of top 1% sellers? The Top 1% Sellers podcast gives you the insights and the tools to help you achieve your sales greatness. The podcast features sales and services professionals, leaders, and experts to give you the edge you're looking for. Here's your host, Ash Sadiq.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Top 1% Sellers podcast. I am today with Pam Fox Rollin from IdeaShape. She is an executive coach and facilitator, and I will actually give Pam an opportunity to tell us a bit about herself. I know you also have published a book as well. Would love to hear from you what the book is about and what do you do.
Great. Thank you so much, Ash. It's a delight to be on. So I work with leaders, many of them who have been absolute rock stars, as probably many of your listeners have been in sales, also folks in marketing, technology, operations, finance. And that's what they know, and they're absolutely brilliant at it. And then they either get promoted up into a role that's broader and more strategic, yes, or they get passed over for that one that they wanted.
Yes.
And then we wind up talking because, and especially for the ones that, they've got the role and they're trying to do it in their old success formula.
Yes.
And it's not working for them. Part of it is about where they focus their attention. So if you're head of sales for an organization, you actually can't be focused 80% on sales.
Yes.
You're focused maybe 30% on sales, but you still want it to run to your standards.
Yes.
So how do you do that? How do you get your next level down to run the sales organization to your standards, while then you're an influential part of the executive team? So that's a lot of work that I do. I also have a book called 42 Rules for Your New Leadership Role.
Yes.
The book they didn't hand you when you made VP, director, or manager. And that has really quick bites. It's written in a really fast format, so people can just go down, look at the title of the 42 chapters and go, oh yeah, that's what I need today.
Yes.
And put that in place. So I work with leaders who come from all different sorts of functions and help them succeed at higher levels.
Fantastic. So I'm very excited because, one of the things I wanted to make sure that our audience sometimes hear from us is definitely this whole issue. If I wanted to get from a direct sales role into a management role, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What do I need to do to make sure I'm going to actually be successful? Because as you said, when they are sales professionals, they know how this game is played and they know how to succeed in it, and they have succeeded. And typically someone who makes it into a management role comes from a background where he was a fantastic seller or she was a fantastic seller, and now he or she thinks, I am, of course, very much deserving of becoming a manager. So I'd like maybe for you to kind of unpack to the audience what you see commonly happening as that transition happens. What are the pitfalls they are up against, and also how should they prepare in order to avoid these pitfalls?
Yes. So sales leaders, as they move up, people who have been really successful individual salespeople or first level sales managers, they do have those strengths that you talked about. They're comfortable talking to people. They're confident. They know how to organize their time. They know how to have an objective and pursue it. So that's great. Where I see them fall down is especially on influence, on cross-functional initiatives, and on developing people in a different way than you need to develop maybe an individual sales manager.
Yes.
So let's take those. On influence, your fellow peer executives, whether you're on the top team or you're a couple levels down in the organization, maybe in a business unit leadership role,
yes,
they know you're in sales and they think you're going to sell them.
Yes.
And most of them think you don't understand what they do.
Yeah.
And you know what? Usually they're right.
Yes.
They're right. So one of the things that I encourage people who've been buried in their function or out in the field is to actually go sit in on the marketing meeting, ask to go be part of the QBR, the quarterly business review, so they get to see what everybody is doing.
Yes.
Go talk to the people and say, hey, what's your highest priority? What are the biggest pain points? You know how to do that. You guys are sales leaders.
Exactly.
But you've got to really understand the other functions in their company. What's important to the controller, the person who is managing, P&L in the organization?
Yes.
What are they looking for?
Yes.
What are their pressures? Ops, technology, all of that. Because you're going to need to influence them to make things happen.
Yes.
And they won't just be impressed by a sales number, which is how you've made it so far.
Absolutely. So it's a very interesting dynamic, as you were saying then, when they were a sales professional, their ability to persuade and get commitment from another sales professional was a whole different ball of game. And then when they're also dealing with their client and they're trying to sell into a new organization, for the most part, they're focused more on the sale itself. Now they are trying to learn, how do I actually sell my own vision, my own initiatives within the company that I am working within. I remember you were just saying earlier that typically they don't really have a lot of connections in the company that they work at, because most of the time they are outbound, focused on the outside. So you just told everybody, some of the things they should do, right? The meetings they should be going to. Now, from an influence perspective, then, what are some of the key things that they could use to develop the skill of influencing? Because it's no longer command and control if that were the case, let's say, in a sales environment.
Right.
Yeah.
And not every sales environment runs in command and control, but a lot of them do.
Exactly, yeah.
And as somebody who studies personality type, and I do a lot on personality type and leadership, you'll find a greater diversity of personalities across the organization. All sales organizations run off a command and control environment. And for sure, that's not going to work as you're trying to influence cross-functionally to make things happen. And I can imagine some sales leaders at this point saying, well, why do I even want to influence cross-functionally? Well, because you want engineering actually to prioritize the things in the queue that will help you sell. You want influence with the people in marketing and product, right? You want the customer support team to really help create the success of your customers, so you get that recurring hit, however that works. You get referenceable customers, all of that. So that kind of influence needs to be done in really different ways. First of all, different personalities. You often find a wider variety, whether you think about it Myers-Briggs or whatever you use, you find a wider variety of personality types across the organization than you do in sales.
Yes, exactly.
Plus, if you've been selling to a certain set of people at clients, they're going to have a narrower band than you will find of the personalities across your organization. Yes. So you need to learn to influence people who naturally are inclined to think about things differently than, what's the discount that I'm going to get on this so that I'm going to close this thing and move on.
Exactly, yeah.
You also need to herd cats in a way that some very experienced enterprise salespeople know about, but if that hasn't been your particular experience, how do you get a group of people to align on something in common? And what kind of seed planting do you need to do? One of the differences I see between sales leaders who rise up and other leaders from other fields, especially technology who rise up, is sales folks tend to have a shorter time horizon that they're thinking about. And, that's a couple quarters off.
Yes.
Well, what people in technology know is that if it's a couple years off, they better start planning it now.
Now, that's a good point.
Building support for it, all of that. So there's this whole seed planting part of influence that is a blind spot for some sales leaders. For some
sales professionals. Very interesting point, because again, I think it's sort of like where they came from is impacting how they think.
Yes.
And the horizons are definitely different. When you have a deal, you're more or less focused on 30, 45 days. You want to close it within a quarter. You're not even looking down that road.
Right.
So that's a very interesting blind spot for sales leaders to understand that now that they're working on a bigger environment, they need to understand that the time frames are different so that they don't develop the impatience, which is typical of sales professionals.
Yes.
That then you have to sort of understand what timeline will actually make sense with everybody else, and then manage to that in that direction. I also wonder, as you work with sales management and leaders, how do you help them make sure they don't sort of default back to the thing they love most, which is sort of going out with and selling directly themselves?
In a way, I mean, bring that with you, of course, right?
Yeah.
Because it's something you've got competence in as a sales professional. Often corporate initiatives, they get stuck. They can't get somebody to close, and you've got that skill and expertise, so you can help unstick some corporate initiatives.
Yes.
Whether they're about roadmap, whether they're about are we going to serve a particular segment? Some of these decisions, they just sit languishing in organizations.
Yes.
And you can use your skills to help unstick that. But you do need to be able to go beyond what you've known how to do. One of the things that any person going from being a real rock star in their function to being successful at a higher level needs to know is, how do you set standards for how your function runs without you having to be on their tush every minute? And how do you build that sort of high accountability organization in maybe 30% of your time to run instead of 80%, so that you've got 70% of your time to go see what competitors are doing in the industry, look for technology threats, partner with your executives in other functions, or in some cases say, hey, where they're leading the organization is not where I see the customers want it to go, and be able to work with them to redirect initiatives in your organization. All of that requires time, and if you try to lead the sales function in the same way that you led your regional sales team, you will not be able to be effective across the organization.
Within the organization. Very, very interesting. I'd love for then just maybe we can take a few minutes for people to sort of understand, if they were to work with you, one-on-one coaching, let's say in this case, a sales leader who's trying to really succeed in becoming a management individual, a sales leadership individual, how, what steps are they going to go through, and how do you do the work with them? Typically, how long does it take, for example?
Typically I work with people for 6 to 12 months. That varies. Sometimes I just coach people for a month as they onboard to a new organization, and really just a quick hit to get their head in a different place. Sometimes I'll work with people for 6 months. We'll say, okay, you got it for now, and then in another year I'll work with them again, because they've integrated that and they're ready for more. Everything that I do is really focused on insight that leads to different actions, to different practices. Because it's really easy, especially for sales professionals, to say, oh, and I've had sales professionals who become leaders who try to sell me on things as a coach, and I'm like, you're selling me on this. Open your calendar, and let's take a look. When did you actually do that? Right? And when are you going to do it? And how do you make that believable to yourself? There's 3 tracks that we tend to work on simultaneously, sometimes with a focus just on one, sometimes with a focus on all 3. One is, how do you get your sales organization working really well to high standards with less time from you? Not less care, not less input, but less time from you. The second thing we work on is, how do we get you more influential across the organization? And part of the reason I think why sales leaders revert, you were talking about kind of going back to your old ways. Part of the reason why they revert is because they know how to do what they know how to do. And they say, well, I don't know what I would do with that 70% of time, even if I were able to get it. Let's plan out, what would you do with it? And then the third thing is just you as a person. Are you healthy? Is this sustainable? When you show up in a room, what's different? Because Ash walked in the room. Do we now see possibility? Do we now see determination? Do we now see we're going to close this thing and move it forward? Or do we see somebody who is resigned, frustrated, exhausted, all of that? So you can't phone it in. Personal leadership requires you as a person to show up.
Because also, very good point you're making, because the impact that everything they're doing and how that's impacting other people on the team itself and the rest of the organization. So that's a very, very good point. As you were talking, because sometimes I speak to entrepreneurs as well, when we think about the whole concept of working in the business and working on the business, there are a lot of what you were saying that is really more about working on the business.
That's right.
The whole idea of sort of stepping back, reflecting, and then being able to see kind of the long term.
That's right.
And what the impact that they're having.
And especially to pull that alignment, I've seen, and I'm sure you have, where half of the sales force is selling stuff that engineering swears up and down they cannot deliver.
Yes.
And the organization winds up being in this stumbling crisis mode where they're not delivering on commitments, and people are getting very frustrated across their client base and across most of the organization.
Yes.
So to get out of that, you have to learn how do you create trustworthy agreements with people in other functions. That's an absolutely critical skill.
Yeah. And speaking to that, I was also wondering, when you do this with the one-on-one coaching, is part of the work that you do with them individually to then sort of agree on sort of stepping out of that coaching room and taking specific actions?
Yes.
Do you sort of give them certain signposts that they work on?
Absolutely. And this is something for people who are self-coaching that you can do as well.
Yes.
So, for example, a fellow I worked with was noticing that in the executive team, he wasn't having much influence. He's like, I get interrupted on the second slide, and then I don't, it doesn't go my way.
Yes.
Everybody says, this guy's so smart. I went and interviewed the rest of the people of the C team. He's so smart. We love having him. And this guy's saying, I have no influence. So we went through his meetings, and we rated his upcoming meetings on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is, I'm just showing up and I don't care much what happens. All the way to 5, which is, this is the hill I'm going to die on.
Yes.
And if I don't have influence on this decision, I'm going to go someplace else, right?
Yes.
And we actually realized that most of the meetings he had at headquarters were 3s and 4s. These were important meetings, but he was preparing as if they were 1s or 2s.
Yes, interesting.
So we talked about how do you prepare for those, and then...
So that's like field work. You're basically looking at the meetings he's having, the kind of influences that he needs to achieve, and
practical, easy ways to do it. Yeah. And then to look at those things that are like 1s, your body is in the room. Well, does your body actually need to be in the room, or do you need to show up with different eyes?
Yes.
Because if you show up with a different perspective, not can I make the sale, or is this going to hurt or help my team, but you show up with a different agenda, you might turn that meeting into a 3 or 4 for influence.
Absolutely. So the intentionality is very key here in terms of what needs to be achieved.
Absolutely.
That's phenomenal. I'm glad that we uncovered that you actually help them with specific action items they take. You actually go and interview others that work with them.
Yes.
You take a look at what one-on-one conversations they have or meetings that they're going to have, and then you come back and you say, let's work on how we achieve the best results out of these meetings.
That's right. And sometimes people want to keep it in, just work with a coach off to the side.
Yes.
And so I don't interact with their world at all.
Yes.
And it really depends on what that person's situation is.
So you can customize based on what
so
the
we
needs are.
customized it, but I never want them to leave a call without specific actions
Yes.
that they're going to take and know how to take.
Yes.
Because that makes it much more likely when we talk in another week or 2 that they're going to have done it and seen the value from it.
Absolutely. I want to cap by letting people listening in know that we are meeting here at the Marriott Waterfront in San Francisco, and you are attending the National Speakers Association conference.
Yes.
Maybe you just let people know, when you do speak and you are brought into organizations to talk to some of their employees or even in other forums, what are some of the topics that they can reach out to Pam on?
Absolutely. Thank you. So 2 weeks ago, I spoke at a sales kickoff. I did the morning keynote, and we talked about what they need to learn in a fast-moving market. This was enterprise sales in security.
Yes.
So really tough, complex, technologically advanced sales.
Yes.
They can't Google this stuff.
Exactly.
They can't go on YouTube. The only people they can learn from are each other.
Yes.
So if they have the mentality of, I'm carrying a bag all by myself, they're going to miss out enormously.
Yes.
And so we had them in the session jot down some things that they've recently figured out are ways that are working on
yes, some competitive messaging, value proposition statement, and so on. Yes,
precisely.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, how many of you have put this in Salesforce? And none of the 120 hands went up.
Raised their hands.
Right?
Wow, yes.
And I said, how many of you have talked to at least one other person about this? And then some hands went up.
Yes.
I'm like, so you got to pick up the phone.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And you are all going to make this market together.
Absolutely.
If you try to do it yourself, you can't learn fast enough to win.
Absolutely. That's a very interesting point, because it's all about capturing that organizational learning and scaling it by making sure it gets into Salesforce, which is the tool that they happen to be using, and then others can learn from it very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
But I've never seen, and maybe some organizations have this, let me know if you do, where Salesforce is the be-all, end-all of learning. To me, it is a great place to start. Hey, who sold into pharma? What are their concerns about data protection?
Yes.
Let me go find, and then pick up the phone and go talk to that person.
Yes, exactly. It's a lot of work, and I think you captured a very good point about the fact that you can't Google it. It's actually organizational knowledge that is evolving and developing. And I remember at Cisco, the key saying was, don't lose alone. And I think in this case also, you win together by collaborating together. Fascinating. I love how we sort of uncovered the work that you do one-on-one, and also the work that can happen actually in a keynote setting as well. Pam, I want to thank you for being here with us on the Top 1% Sellers podcast, and we'll definitely make sure that our audience gets all your contact information as well.
Such a pleasure, Ash. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for tuning in to the Top 1% Sellers podcast. Give us your suggestions and guest recommendations by emailing us at ash@connectwithash.com. Thank you also for sharing this podcast with your colleagues and social media contacts. To connect with us on LinkedIn, please send a connect request to ash@connectwithash.com. See you at our next episode. Thanks for tuning in.